the fact that Q-Tip turned 50, or anyone else that we've talked about, I think it's really cool, and I think we should stop and celebrate them, because hip hop is big on birthdays and historically astrology too. But Q-Tip is ageless to me,
Yeah.
and it's just remarkable that you're giving flowers and celebration to somebody who's very active, especially even in the last 5 years, what Tip has done.
So let's talk about his impact on hip hop. I mean, yeah, it's so much deeper than. First of all, Tribe is like one of the most influential groups
Mm-hmm.
of all time of any genre. I mean, they've spawned so many people from that whole native tongues, like linear tree. But Q-Tip, with his production, with his features, Nas to Danny Brown and everything in between. Like, what does Q-Tip mean to you for hip hop?
I mean, Q-Tip is just the epitome of to know your future is to know your past. I mean, one of the things that I love about Q-Tip is he's always taken culture that he holds in high regard with him. And you can look in the early years and say that's sampling. You can look at so one of the things that Q-Tip did recently, and it's very successful. Q-Tip has a lot of wins that I think hip hop heads don't realize, or we don't necessarily pay attention to. I'm not saying it's a great record, but recently, Q-Tip did a version with Demi Lovato of "Don't Go Breaking My Heart," the
Hmm.
Elton John and what is it, like Kiki D record from '76, and that's like a record he must like. Like, obviously, Q-Tip doesn't need to do that, but he does it, and he does it in his way, and it's been more successful as a single than I think anything that he's done in the last 5 or 6 years. But in the same time, you have this incredible Grammy performance. You have obviously the SNL Tribe drop. Yeah, I mean, Q-Tip to me is just, he's evolved, but he's always kept that essence of, like, let me put you onto something, whether I'm DJing, whether I'm rapping, whether I'm producing. And I love that. That's one of the reasons I love hip hop, period.
So, what do you like more, his work with Tribe or his solo work?
I recently put on the Renaissance in the last 2 weeks, and I had forgotten. I mean, that was one of my favorite albums of 2008, and I hadn't listened to it in a while. I came back, loved it. Even loved the Kamal record that came out later, the Abstract. But obviously, I mean, the answer is Tribe. Tribe is just that, discovering that music and living. So I remember buying Beats, Rhymes, and Life the week it came out on cassette tape, but I had obviously missed the first three albums. But like, I belonged to that movement as it was happening, even if I was in the middle towards the end. Tribe is everything, to me, and the whole Native Tongues is that's everything as well.
Yeah, I mean, Tribe, probably my favorite group of all time.
No.
Low End Theory is a top three album for me.
Mhm.
Maybe top two. That and the Chronic. But you put on Breathe and Stop or Vibrant Thing at a party right now,
Yeah.
it's gonna set it off. You know what I mean? In a way that's different than Tribe music. It's almost like two completely different entities, And he
Yeah.
did he did morph and kind of mold into um, he molded into Tribe. It wasn't just his son. I think actually I'd say the exception is that last album. The last album they did, I think,
Yeah.
is felt to me more like a Q-Tip album than a
Yeah.
Tribe album. And maybe
Right.
that's because Fife wasn't present for the whole making of it, and Ali Shaheed, wasn't part of it. But aside from that, his work with Tribe was radically different, I thought, than his solo work.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. And Q-Tip, it's living art. It's interesting you say that about Low End Theory and the Chronic. Dre, around the Chronic, when he did interviews, he said the most influential rap um, body of work to what he was doing on that album was Tribe.
Hmm.
And I think the Low End Theory in particular, like, even though those two albums side by side don't necessarily have a whole lot in common in theory, the way that Tip and Tribe had orchestrated that was influential to the whole G Funk sound. And then, yeah, you look at what Q-Tip did with Mobb Deep, with Nas, with, you know, other corners of native tongues like beat nuts and stuff like that. And he's so versatile.
Well, I mean, you talk about that, like, if you remember in Straight Outta Compton, the first time we're introduced to Dr. Dre in the movie, he's laying on the floor listening to Roy Ayers, Everybody Loves the Sunshine, in his
Yeah.
headphones, right? And clearly Roy Ayers was influential to Tip and Tribe, you know, with Ramp and Daylight for like Bonita Applebum and, you know, all that other stuff. So I could see that. I could see that for Dre. So, you know, okay, let's talk about Tip as an MC versus a producer. Which one do you think had more impact, him as a producer or him as an MC?
You know, it's hard. It's one of those things, like, as a producer, my favorite Q-Tip productions are, you know, the stuff he made with Tribe, even more than the Uma, which I know is sacrilege to a lot of people. But to me, you know, that early stuff that I think him and certainly Ali Shaheed and to some extent Fife made, that's my favorite. Or you could just like sample any record. That being said, I think of Q-Tip more as an MC first. And he's made some great production. I got really, really loved what he did with Danny Brown last year. But yeah, Tip to me is an MC, but one of the best double threats that does not get enough credit as a double threat. What about you?
You know, I don't think that he gets enough credit as a producer. You know, when
Mm,
we did GOAT Producer, he came in at like top 10 or so, right? Like
I
number
believe
seven
so.
or something like
Yeah.
that. You know, I mean, well, first of all, it's hard. It's blurry with all the tribe stuff because you just never know who did what. You
Yeah.
know, same thing with the but you know, when you start to think about stuff like what he did for Mobb Deep with, you know, Temperatures Rising and, you know, One Love with like Nas, like those are just classic, timeless records, you
Yeah.
know. And you know, I think his production work stands. It's not as extensive as like a Primo or Pete Rock
Mhm.
or RZA or Kanye or something like that, but I think that his records, you know, stand with some of their greatest records.
Absolutely. And he's never, one of the things that I think he deserves a lot of credit for is One Love on its own sounds like a Q-Tip record. I mean, just I think those are vibraphones and just that whole jazzy feeling, but it really obviously works within, you know, Illmatic, which had all of these different hands. Same with the stuff he did on the Infamous. Like, Q-Tip has this ability to bring his ingredients into somebody else's recipe and not change, just add to it without overwhelming the flavor, which, you know, you put a Dre beat on, you know, I was just listening to Devin the Dudes, just trying to stay alive, or just trying to live a lot over the last week. And the minute the Dre track comes on and the minute the Primo track comes on, you know it's them. And they're great songs, but when Q-Tip produces, it just adds to the album. It adds to the moment without being like, oh, this is Q-Tip. So
It's kind of like Rick Rubin, right? In his later
yeah.
years, Rick Rubin, by design, goes in and enhances. He brings out the artist, you know, what the artist has within them, rather than like imposing his sound on them. Yeah, I get
Hmm.
that. So, well, first of all, who are some of your favorite producers?
Premier is, you know, high and
Yeah, number
above.
one. Yeah.
Um, Certainly Dre. Love Prince Paul. And Prince Paul, to me, I was thinking about this last night with RZA. So apart from Prince Paul with the first three De La albums, I think what RZA did on the first Wu album, and I'm not just trying to pontificate, I think it's the greatest single album production by one person.
Mm.
Because if I'm not mistaken, like Mathematics and True Master, no one, all production credit on that album goes to RZA, and I haven't heard any of that, you know, really debated, which was amazing because he played half the album in the battle. But yeah, I mean, I think what RZA alone did between like 93 and 2000 deserves in there. And Large Professor is another one. And then I'm going to give it up because they just don't get enough shout out is Marley, of course. And, you know, Larry Smith, you know, who did
Mm.
Houdini and Fat Boys, and first as a musician, but later as a producer. Deserves big
Oh,
credit.
Larry Smith was ill, man. I
Yeah.
love that Fat Boy. Like it was like it was very keyboard driven, very
Hmm.
soulful, very musical. You know, and not disco, but just you could put it on with in that era with that kind of record, you know,
Hmm.
like the Breaks and, you know, stuff like that. The Breaks was almost like a disco record, you know.
Yeah.
For me, it went by eras. In the '80s, it probably was Larry Smith,
Mhm.
and then Rick Rubin, because I just love those 808s. We talked about that, a couple weeks ago. Just so heavy, like radio and like Rock the Bells and all that. And then it morphed into like the premier Dre era for me. And then in like early 2000s, it shifted to Neptunes. Man,
Really?
Neptunes,
Yeah.
Neptunes are like some of my all-time favorite producers in any genre. And actually, going back to the '80s, it was Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. Like they
Okay.
superseded any like hip hop producers for me.
Did they do many hip hop records?
No, no, I'm saying like I
No, I
love,
know what you mean, but out
yeah.
of curiosity, did like Teddy Riley did stuff with Cool Mo D and Heavy D, and had a hand in the show, by Dougie Fresh. But did Jim and Terry ever do like a proper hip hop record?
I think the closest they did, if I'm remembering correctly, "Got Till It's Gone" was a co-production with
Hmm.
Q-Tip.
Hmm.
So that would probably be the closest. And that record in itself was crazy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
oh, and that was Dilla too, right? Yeah,
Well,
Dilla
Dilla
was
did the
that too. Yeah,
remix too.
yeah,
That's my favorite Janet album, which I know is sacrilege, but
yeah.
you know.
And then later 2000s, like Kanye, um, you know, um, deceptively in there is like Alchemist and Ninth,
Hmm. Yeah.
real soulful, like boom bap. Yeah, man. So yeah, it's a range, but I think the common thread for me is musical. I like the musical texture.
Yeah.
The I think you gravitate more toward the amelodic, kind of more abrasive kind of production.
Yeah, but it's funny. Like recently, I've been on a huge, like, not just DJ Quick solo catalog, but the
Mm.
stuff that Quick did for like Sugar Free and AMG and that whole Pac and stuff. And like to me, that's very musical. Um, but yeah, I mean, Dre's number two when it comes to melody. But I've never been a Neptune's head. I appreciate them. I have the utmost respect. But that's never been my bag. When that was going on, I was much more in like the Just Blaze, D Dot, the Hitmen, like that whole camp.
Yeah, you're not really an R&B dude. Like we've had this debate for years. We have gotten in fisticuffs about R&B. You're not an R&B cat though. Like,
Modern R&B. Like
well,
I
I mean,
love,
you love
yeah,
soul,
yeah.
but you're not an R&B dude. Like Anita Baker, does that do much for you?
Only because of hanging out with you. Like it was funny. I was.
Pause.
Yeah. No, like this morning as we were making breakfast, I was playing Alexander O'Neal, and I was like,
Oh,
"Yo,
word.
yeah," but
Wait. You playing Alexander O'Neal? Word? Like,
all right,
wow.
yeah, you don't. I
What
mean, you just
song?
what's the joint? Hold on, the big one. Hold on.
If You Were Here Tonight,
Yeah, give me 1 second. I put it on.
Criticize,
Bear with me
What's
one.
Missing,
I added it, so I add everything to
Saturday
playlists.
Love.
No, because that's number two. I'm always like, and I love to see what people's stats are on Spotify. So it was If You Were Here Tonight.
If You Were Here Tonight, that's the first
Yeah.
one I said. Yeah,
Oh, okay,
yeah,
there we
yeah,
go. Okay.
yeah.
Entry level, entry level.
Wow.
I'm not as
I
anti.
know what you were doing this morning. I know what you fucking.
Yeah, I'm not as basic as you paint me out to be.
Okay. Alexander O'Neal, that's shocking. That's quite shocking. All right, well, so
Yeah.
back to hip hop.
Yeah. Wait. Back to Q-Tip. Let me ask you this
Yeah,
question because you mentioned features, and more than anybody, I mean, Q-Tip. He has work with everybody across the board. Do you have a favorite off the beaten path? It could be a feature verse or a rarity like Q-Tip. Um, yeah, let's say verse.
yeah. I mean, "Got Till It's Gone" is like one of my favorite songs ever. Like, I thought he just killed that. Like, and the way he approached the rhyme, like, it's just, yeah, that's one of my favorite Q-Tip joints. How about you?
Yeah. So he did this joint with Large Professor called "In the Sun," and it was on Large Professor's First Class album, which did not get enough love. And it's just like it's a simplistic rhyme scheme, but it is so deep. And those two guys that have just such distinct cadences and deliveries. Oh man, that's a sleeper.
Mm. Would you say that he is the best producer MC?
That's a really good question. Definitely. I mean, of that era, we're not saying like J. Cole, or are we?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, let's go through it. Like, who's in that conversation?
I mean, if you just want to talk impact, which Q-Tip absolutely deserves on the impact level, you've got Kanye and J. Cole for sure. I'm not going to put Diddy or Dre in that conversation just because that gets a little bit gray.
Yeah. What about
Um,
DJ Quik?
I mean, and then there's that, and then there's this other conversation where I'm like, yo, Lord Finesse, Large Professor, Diamond D. Um, man,
Pete Rock.
Yeah, I mean, I love Pete.
Havoc.
He's Havoc. You know, it gets tricky. It gets really tricky. I absolutely, and I'm not trying to duck, but I think that he definitely is in the top 3 all day long on either side of that coin.
What about
Whether you want to go,
now?
Royce jumped in there. I mean, the production, the allegory. I'm trying to think. Is that? Yeah, I mean, because you said Jay Electronica is probably your favorite album of the year so far with the allegory.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of an album that's been better produced this year than the allegory, and I know it's only April, but even in the last year, I like Royce's production on the allegory as much as I like what Madlib did on Bandana, which is
wow,
like
that's crazy.
strong words.
Yeah,
that's strong words.
Yeah. What about Big Crit? I mean, Crit, incredible producer and MC.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what he did with his latest album, you know, kind of sharing that work so he could focus on MCing, but I don't want him to pull a Pimp C, which I know is one of his heroes, and walk away from production too far. You know?
That's another one, Pimp. Yeah, Pimp C.
So, yeah.
There's a bunch. It's a hard one. It's
a
hard one.
But I'm glad you asked the question, because Q-Tip absolutely doesn't only deserve to be in the conversation. He is a formidable answer to that question.